Then in 1965, you had the incredible Selma to Montgomery March. 600 protesters went to the Pettus Bridge, and the clips you see was one of the first times it was put on national TV when they were attacked by state troopers and the National Guard. And when America saw that live on their screen, it was the first time that you got a chance to see that kind of brutality. It enraged America because America was starting to see the curtain peeled back and we weren't living up to our ideals. Then, the greatest black civil rights leader in the history of our country was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee at the Lorraine Motel. I remember as a kid, I don't remember Malcolm X's death, but I remember Martin Luther King's death. And I don't remember it as a kid of how it impacted me. I remember how it impacted my family. I remember my mother, her sisters, my aunts, all the older folks. Something happened to them. And those folks have not been the same since this day. Any of those folks that were alive at that time, that at the era when it meant something to them, they are not the same, because this was the guy who we were going to rally behind. He was definitely that leader that was going to take America and take us to where we needed to go. So then we get to the 70s and the 80s. We came out the 60s. Now we're getting to the era of incredible black cultural movement. Black pride is coming along. Fashion is in. Film is in. You see the styles. We're embracing the natural things that we were endowed with. And the 70s was a great time. Then here comes the 80s. The economy was booming. Money was prevalent. But this scourge called crack and cocaine hit the market because it was a drug that had a lot of dollars behind it, and it decimated the black community to the point where we lost the whole generation. They either went to prison, they either were caught up in cyclical poverty, or they just lost their lives due to the drug game. So it was a time of incredible excess, but it was also a time of death. Then 1992 hits, and the Rodney King verdict. Now you're getting more into the era. As I'm more of a young man, I'm starting to see some things that are happening. And when that verdict was read, South LA went ballistic. They literally, 4 days of rioting, 55 people dead, 2,300 injured, and they burned down 1,000 buildings. Rodney King was awarded $3.8 million in the civil case, so you know something happened that should not have happened. In 1995, you had the Million Man March, led by the fiery Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, who is not someone who white America really has a good affinity for. I think most folks thought it would spiral into some chaos and out of control, and it was one of the most peaceful, incredible marches because he wanted to get black men specifically, to uplift, to dig in, to rebuild the communities, to get themselves together. And he put together an incredible message that went over incredibly well. And then people give George Bush a lot of flack for what he did with the weapons of mass destructions, and maybe you didn't appreciate his leadership style, but George Bush made General Colin Powell the first black Secretary of State. If you don't know what that means as far as Secretary of State, go look at your government and see where the Secretary of State sits in the rankings of the power base. And the crazy thing was, after Colin resigned, Condoleezza Rice filled the spot. So not only did he put the first black man there, he also put the first black woman in there. So give President Bush a little credit, you know? Give him a little bit of credit for what he did. And then in 2008, this was the one. In 2008, no one saw this coming. President Barack Obama was elected as the 44th president of this United States. At that moment, that was a nuclear bomb that went across black America. But you have to really think bigger than that. It wasn't just black America, because if only blacks voted for Barack Obama, he would have never gotten office. His message resonated across all of America. Black, white, Latin, Asian, Native American. His message was that message of hope, prosperity, and again, his election to office let America know that if you come from the bottom, you can make it all the way to the top, because you can fully realize the American dream. But he took over at the worst time to be the president, didn't he? The banking industry was in tatters, the automobile industry was done, the healthcare industry. So in the black community, we like to joke, of course that was the time they're going to let the black man be the president, when all hell was breaking loose, right? But what did he do? Barack Obama showed you black leadership and he showed you black love. For the people who don't like him politically, that's your right. That's your right as a citizen of his country. But when you look at a black leader who had to step in front of the stage and deliver what he delivered, you have to give him some respect. And when you look at his family, what he did with his wife and his 2 daughters, that is the definition of black love. And I would challenge any of you to look at your own families, and you don't want the same thing that he want for his family. So you give that man the due he's respected, because that's what he brought to America. He brought class back to that office again. And then in 2012, there's this term Black Lives Matter. I think it's got hijacked now. People take Black Lives Matter as black people don't believe nobody else's lives matter. That is the furthest thing from the truth. When the woman made this statement, it was in regards to Trayvon Martin's death, and she's an organizer, and she just made a simple post on Facebook, and it took on a whole new life of its own. Basically, all she wants to tell you is that we know all lives matters, but right now black lives are going through some stuff. We need some help. We can't do it alone. Black America needs everybody to assist us in this journey to try to get us to where we're trying to go. In 2020, the George Floyd death, people can feel what they want to feel about him when you pull his record and look at some of the petty things he was involved in. But you cannot deny that when you watch that video of someone kneeling on his back, he's telling you he can't breathe for 8 minutes, and he dies under those conditions, it didn't just affect America. Normally when something like that happens, it's regional, state, maybe a part of the country. This went global. There were people in Sweden and Finland that don't look nothing like me who organized and marched in protest to what they saw. So George Floyd's death was a whole different thing that none of us expected, even to the point our own CEO has been putting messages out around that death. If you don't believe it means something, pick up the phone and call Ralph and ask him what it meant to him, because that message resonated around the world. Then in 2021, President Biden did something shocking. He elected a black woman as his vice president. Who saw Kamala Harris after the battles they had on the debate coming over to be his VP? I wouldn't have picked her under those conditions. But my God, he had the foresight to do that. And if we get lucky, he also is going to put the first black woman as the 116th justice on the Supreme Court. So there is a slow change that you can see happening with a nice ebb and flow. And what all those things are telling you? We want to talk about equity. Equity is about impartiality, fairness, and justice. Look at this image. I showed you equality first. This is equity. Let me put them side by side. Equality, everybody's treated the same. I ask you again in the chat, is that fair? Yes, no, maybe. Then equity. Everybody's not treated the same, but now they have an opportunity to experience the same experience. That's the difference. And this is what black America wants. We don't want a handout. We want equality and equity to give us the opportunity to be those things that we're trying to aspire to and what we're trying to be. And the best way I can explain this to you is let Dr. King tell you, because the best definition that I ever heard, or the best comment of black America, is in his speech.
Is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here in chains, treated in very inhuman fashion, and this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land, or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression, and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
And I would just like to say to you, as we close out, so who am I? Who is Alvin Jones? Well, Frederick Douglass wrote, Malcolm X spoke, Prince created, they were all disruptors, and they all lived through me, giving me hope that we can live up to the American dream and the American ideal. As I said, we cannot do it alone. We need help. We need everyone to pitch in to ensure that we make it equitable, that we make it equal, and that when you see the injustice that are being done, you speak up. The greatest comment is silence is complicity. Don't be afraid to step in front and speak up. Hey folks, my name is Alvin Lewis Jones, better known as AJ. That's my presentation for you. I hope you've enjoyed it.